Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at psychological research.
Ooh, exciting.
I know, right?
Mm.
We've got this excerpt from a psychology research methods textbook.
Okay.
And we're going to try to figure out the hows and the whys
Right.
behind all the research that shapes, how we understand ourselves.
Mm.
Get ready to see how scientists take a question
Okay.
and turn it into an actual study.
I like it. So it's like we're giving everyone X-ray vision
Oh, I like
to
it.
look at all those psychology articles that are always out there.
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
So the textbook starts off by, defining what psychological research is.
Uh-huh.
It seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Psychologists use research to answer questions about, behavior, thoughts, and feelings.
Yeah, and all the human stuff.
All the human stuff, exactly.
Yeah.
And what's so fascinating is that the impact of this research goes way beyond just the lab. It affects individuals, families, even society as a whole.
Totally, yeah.
Like, for example, the research on media violence helped to create the V-chip in TVs.
Oh, yeah.
That gave parents more control over what their kids are watching.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
It shows how research can lead to actual change, real-world change.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's so interesting to me about psychology is that there are very clear applications to it.
Exactly. Yeah, there are. And to get those impactful findings, those changes.
Yeah.
Psychologists use something called the empirical approach.
Okay.
It's all about observing and experimenting.
Okay.
They want to see the evidence firsthand.
So they're like detectives of the mind.
Exactly.
Gathering clues and piecing together the puzzle of human behavior.
And like any good detective, they've got to be skeptical.
Right.
They don't just accept the first explanation they find.
Uh-huh.
Instead, they look for converging evidence.
What does that mean?
That means that the same result has to come from multiple different studies
Oh, okay.
before they really trust that the finding is true.
Oh, that makes sense because any one study could have a fluke or it could have some limitations.
Exactly.
But if you see the same thing over and over again from different researchers,
Yeah,
then it's a much stronger sign that it's real.
absolutely. And it just reminds us that science is a process. It's not like an endpoint.
Yeah.
It's always kind of evolving, moving forward.
As new evidence emerges.
Exactly.
Now, another thing that the textbook talked about was the historical context of psychology.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting to see how the entire field has been shaped by ideas and events.
Yeah, over time.
Over time.
Psychology has its own story.
It's like psychology has a story.
Yeah, it started with its roots in philosophy and physiology,
Okay.
focusing on things like sensation and perception,
Mm-hmm.
and then it moved towards behaviorism, which was all about actions, what you could observe.
Okay.
And now we're really focused on cognitive processes and neuroscience.
So the focus has shifted from just what we do
Right.
to how we think.
Exactly, yeah.
And that brings in the brain and how it all works.
And we can't forget technology.
Right.
It has a huge impact on the field.
Absolutely.
Think about the computer revolution.
Mm-hmm.
That had such a big influence on cognitive psychology.
Right. The brain became this amazing computer that had to be decoded.
Yeah.
And it's still being decoded.
Exactly.
But science doesn't happen just in a lab, right?
Right.
The textbook also pointed out that there's this thing called the social and cultural context.
Yes, that is crucial.
And it seems like that plays a role in what researchers even choose to study.
Yeah. The zeitgeist,
Oh,
it's a German word, the zeitgeist. It means the spirit of the times.
okay.
So whatever's going on in society
Right.
really influences what questions researchers are asking.
And how society receives those findings.
Exactly. And in recent decades, there's been a lot more research on women's issues and issues faced by minorities,
Mm-hmm.
just reflecting the fact that our society is changing, becoming more diverse.
So the questions we ask as a society end up shaping the direction of research.
Precisely.
It's almost like research can hold up a mirror to society
Yeah.
and sometimes show us things that maybe we don't want to see.
Exactly. And sometimes research findings clash with our values as a society.
Right.
And that leads to debate, to conflict.
Yeah.
There was this study on child sexual abuse that the textbook mentioned.
Oh, right.
And it caused a lot of controversy.
Yeah.
Because the conclusions of that study challenged some pretty deeply held beliefs that we have as a society.
Mm-hmm.
So it just goes to show that research can be messy.
Right.
And sometimes it forces us to face some uncomfortable truths.
And speaking of changing times,
Yes.
the internet has totally changed the game in terms of how psychologists collect data.
Oh, yeah.
It's opened up a whole global pool of potential participants, right?
It's incredible the reach that we have now.
But that makes me wonder, Is psychology too focused on just one specific group of people?
What do you mean?
Like the textbook mentioned the weird folks.
Oh, right. The weird folks, yeah.
Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
Yeah.
If most of the research is just on that group, can we really say that the findings apply to everyone?
That is a very important question, and I think researchers are still trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
It highlights how important it is to have diverse samples in research.
So that our findings are actually more representative of everybody?
Exactly.
So we're starting to see how the context of a study can have an influence on the findings, right?
Yeah.
Just like the historical and social influences that we talked about before.
It's all connected.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see that now.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so how about we take a quick break,
Sounds good.
and we'll come back and we'll talk about some more of this.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, it really is all connected. And I
Okay.
think it shows how important it is to think critically
Okay.
about any research findings that we see,
Especially in the media.
especially in the media. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Because they love to overblow things.
Yeah, you can't just take headlines at face value, right?
Right.
That's what the textbook's talking about. This
Yeah.
idea of being skeptical
Uh-huh.
consumers of research.
We have to be skeptical.
Okay, so how do we do that? I mean, most of us aren't scientists, right?
Right.
How do we know if a study is really solid or not?
That's a great question, and luckily, the textbook gives us a few tips.
Okay.
Remember that idea of converging evidence?
Oh, you mean like
Yeah.
where multiple studies have to have the same results?
Exactly, yeah. So
Yeah.
any one study that's just like one piece of the puzzle,
Right.
we need to see if that finding is replicated
Okay.
by different researchers,
Right.
ideally using different methods,
Okay.
before we start thinking that it's a really strong conclusion.
So it's kind of like having multiple witnesses to a crime.
Ooh, I like that.
The more people you have that back up the same story,
Yeah,
the more confident you can be that that's what really happened.
that's a great analogy.
And then even then, we have to remember that scientific conclusions
Yeah.
are usually probabilistic,
Yeah.
which means they're not absolute.
Right.
Right. There's always the chance that new evidence could come along
Exactly.
and totally change our understanding of something.
So we got to be open to revising our beliefs.
Right. Always be learning. Always be open.
Always be open, exactly.
And speaking of changing our beliefs and media hype, the textbook had a great example.
Oh, yeah. What was it?
The Mozart effect.
Oh, the Mozart effect.
Yeah.
That was so big in the 90s.
Huge in the 90s, this idea that listening to Mozart makes you smarter.
Yeah.
I remember, like, my parents were playing classical music all the time.
I know my parents, too.
And I was a kid.
I mean, it really took off.
Yeah.
But when you look at the original research,
Mm-hmm.
it actually found a very specific and limited effect.
Okay.
So they had these college students,
Okay.
and they had them do, like, this spatial reasoning task. And they found that the students did a little bit better on this one specific type of task after they listened to Mozart, compared to just silence or, like, relaxation instructions.
But then the media just blew that way out of proportion, didn't they?
Completely, yeah.
They were like, Mozart makes you smarter.
Yeah, and everybody was like, oh my gosh.
Right, gotta play Mozart for my babies.
Yeah, even when they're in the womb.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is going to give them such an advantage.
Right.
And of course, everybody went and bought a ton of Mozart CDs.
Right.
But the thing is,
Yeah.
later research
Yeah.
really cast doubt on this Mozart effect.
Oh, so it wasn't real.
Well, it seems like if there's any cognitive boost,
Okay.
it's probably from like general mood and arousal
Okay.
and not anything specific about Mozart's music.
Okay.
So it's a good reminder that we can't just trust the headlines.
Right.
We got to go deeper.
So do we all have to become, like, expert researchers just to read the news?
No, I mean, you don't need a PhD, but you can be a savvy consumer of research.
Okay.
One tip the book gives us is to try to track down the original source.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
like, don't just read the news article or the blog post or whatever.
Yeah, try to find the actual study.
Go to the study itself.
Yeah, I know it can be a little more technical,
Okay.
but it gives you a much better understanding of what the research actually says.
Without the spin.
Exactly.
Okay. Are there any other things we can look out for?
Yeah, I mean, think about the methodology. Does the study's method seem sound?
Mm-hmm.
Do the findings line up with other research in the field?
Right.
Are there any, like, biases or conflicts of interest?
Okay.
All of that is important to think about
It sounds like we have to be detectives,
a little bit. Yeah,
just like those psychologists.
that's the spirit.
So let's imagine now that we want to put on our researcher hats.
Okay, I like it.
Where do we even begin if we want to study something scientifically?
So The textbook actually suggests that it can be as simple as just being curious.
What do you mean?
What are you passionate about?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to know more about?
Okay.
What puzzles you about people?
So it could be something personal, like something I've always wondered about.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And especially for students, a lot of times those initial research ideas come from their classes
Makes sense.
or from talking to their professors.
You're already immersed in a topic,
Exactly.
and the questions just kind of naturally come up.
Right. But regardless of where the idea comes from,
Mm-hmm.
the textbook says it's really important to look at the research that's already been published.
So do your homework
Yeah, do your homework.
before you just dive into a new project.
Exactly. We got to see what's already known.
Okay.
What are the gaps? What questions haven't been answered yet?
Right.
What methods have people been using to study these things?
So we're building on the work that's already been done.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like joining a conversation
Okay.
that's already happening.
I like that.
And it can be really exciting. Yeah. To just kind of dive into that research literature.
It's like falling down a research rabbit hole.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Now, when you're thinking about research questions,
Mm-hmm.
the textbook gives us some criteria to think about.
Okay.
Are they scientifically important?
Okay, so not just any question will do.
Right, exactly.
It has to actually have the potential to contribute something.
Yeah, we don't want to waste time and resources on a question that doesn't matter.
Right.
We want to create new knowledge
Okay.
that has an impact.
So let's say we have a research question that meets those criteria.
Okay.
What's the next step?
So then we have to formulate a hypothesis.
What is that?
So that's where we come up with a tentative explanation
Okay.
or prediction.
So like an educated guess.
Yeah, an educated guess based on what we already know.
Okay.
And the hypothesis has to be testable.
Okay.
We need to be able to design a study
Uh-huh.
that will either support or refute our hypothesis.
Okay.
Now, the textbook talks about this researcher named McGuire, and he came up with 49 heuristics for generating hypotheses.
49. That's a lot.
There's a lot. Yeah, think of them as like mental shortcuts
Okay.
for coming up with research ideas.
Can you give me some examples?
Yeah. So one heuristic
Okay.
is to think about things that deviate from a general trend.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
let's say you notice that most people
Yeah.
like to work in groups,
Mm-hmm.
but there are some people
Mm-hmm.
who really thrive when they work independently.
Okay.
That deviation from the norm,
Yeah.
that could spark a research question.
Okay.
Like, what makes those people different?
So looking for the exceptions to the rule.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Another heuristic is to imagine that you were in a specific situation
Okay.
and how you would act.
Okay.
So you're putting yourself in someone else's shoes
Okay.
to try to understand why they do what they do.
Okay. I like that.
Or you could think about problems that are similar
Okay.
to the one you're interested in,
Mm-hmm.
but that have known solutions. So for example, let's say you're trying to figure out why people procrastinate.
Mm.
You might look at the research on addiction or impulse control
Okay.
because we have some strategies for overcoming those things.
So we're borrowing ideas from other areas of research.
Exactly. The point is, there are lots of different ways to think about a research question.
So it takes creativity.
It does.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that's so cool about research.
Yeah.
But remember, we're just getting started.
Right. We have to design the study.
Yeah.
We have to collect the data.
Yeah.
We got to make sure everything's ethical.
Of course,
So-
there's a whole process.
Our journey.
It's a journey,
Yeah.
which we'll continue to explore on this deep dive.
Okay, sounds good. So we've explored how to think like a researcher, right? How to spot those bad claims and how to even come up with our own research questions.
Mhm.
But let's talk about how do they actually do it? How do psychologists actually gather that evidence? What are those research methods the textbook keeps mentioning?
That's where the magic happens.
Okay.
The source materials is really emphasizing that there's no one right way to do research.
Right.
You know, psychology is this huge field,
Yeah.
and researchers use this whole toolbox of different methods
Yeah.
to study behavior and mental processes.
So it's like having all these different lenses to view the same thing.
Yeah.
And each one reveals something a little bit different.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Mhm.
So we've got surveys, experiments, case studies, qualitative approaches.
Right.
Each one has its own pluses and minuses.
Okay.
And remember that multi-method approach we were talking about.
Yeah.
So using a bunch of different methods gives us a more complete picture.
Right. A more nuanced understanding.
Yeah. It's like looking at a puzzle from all sides.
Right.
And each piece, each method kind of contributes to that bigger picture.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So what does the textbook say about, how these methods actually work in practice?
Well, it doesn't go into too much detail on each specific method.
Oh.
Like, that would be another deep dive in itself.
Right.
But it does give us this overview of the whole research process.
Okay.
And it outlines all the steps, like starting with the research question,
Yeah.
coming up with a hypothesis,
Right.
defining variables.
Variables, what are those again?
Oh, so those are the things that we measure or manipulate
Okay.
in the study.
Okay.
So, for example, if we're looking at sleep deprivation and how that affects memory,
Okay.
our variables would be sleep. That's the thing that we're changing.
Okay.
And memory performance. That's the thing that we're measuring.
Got it.
Okay, so once we figured out the variables,
Yeah.
then we have to choose the research design.
What's that?
So that's where we decide how we're going to actually conduct the study.
Okay.
So will it be an experiment? Are we going to control certain factors?
Okay.
Will it be a survey where we just collect a bunch of information from a lot of people?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it'll be a case study where we're just looking at one person in depth. So the way we design it really depends on what the research question is
Correct.
and what kind of information we're trying to get.
So it sounds like there's a lot of planning involved even before you start collecting anything.
Oh, tons of planning.
Okay.
And then, of course, we have to collect the data.
Right.
And this might involve running experiments, conducting interviews, sending out surveys, observing people in their natural habitat.
It really depends on the method.
It all depends on the method.
Yeah.
And then comes the analysis, right?
Making sense of all that data.
Yes. Once we have all this data, we've got to analyze it to see if it backs up our hypothesis or not.
Right.
And this often involves doing statistical analysis,
Yeah.
looking for patterns and relationships in the data.
Yeah.
And then finally, we get to share what we found with the world.
Oh, right. Publication.
Yeah, we can publish it in research journals.
Okay.
We can present it at conferences.
So it's a really long journey.
It is. It's a journey.
From that initial question to getting those results published,
Yeah.
it seems like every step is super important
Yeah.
to make sure that the findings are accurate.
Exactly. And reliable.
So as we wrap up this deep dive
Yes.
into the world of psychological research,
Mhm.
what's the big takeaway? What should we as listeners be thinking about?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that this science of psychology,
Yeah.
it's always changing.
Right.
It's driven by curiosity, by skepticism,
Yeah.
and this desire to really understand how we work as humans.
And that journey of understanding is never really over, is it?
No.
I mean, we've covered so much in this deep dive,
Yeah.
but there's always more to learn.
Yeah.
Always more questions.
So many questions.
More mysteries to solve.
Exactly. And that's what makes it fun.
Well, to all of you listeners out there, keep that curiosity burning.
Yes.
Keep questioning the world around you.
Please do.
Who knows? Maybe you'll be the ones contributing to this field someday.
Perhaps.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.